Good evening. Buenas noches, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan, Miami Book Fair, and everyone at Books and Books, I'm thrilled to welcome you to tonight's virtual evening with Paul Tremblay to discuss his chilling new novel, Survivor Song, published by William Morrow. Set in Massachusetts, at the radiating point of a rabies-like virus which turns animals and alike into ravenous killers, the New York Times hailed Survivor Song as a zombie novel for our virus-stricken times, and The Guardian called the work disturbingly prophetic. Amidst the violence of rapid viral spread in Paul's focused portrait of contagion, The Guardian further claims Survivor Song is the author's warmest and most humane book to date. Paul is the author of Growing Things, The Cabin at the End of the World, Disappearance at Devil's Rock, A Head Full of Ghosts, and the crime novels The Little Sleep and No Sleep Till Wonderland. He has won the Bram Stoker British Fantasy and Massachusetts Book Awards, and his essays and short fiction have appeared in the Los Angeles Times, Entertainment Weekly, online, and several years' best anthologies. He has a master's degree in mathematics and lives outside Boston with his family. In conversation with him tonight are moderators Kat Scully and Errick Nunnally. Kat Scully is the author and illustrator of the young adult illustrated horror novel series Jennifer Strange, with a first novel forthcoming July 21st this year from Haverhill House Publishing. She's the creator of her celebrated world maps, featured in Brooklyn Brujas trilogy by Zoraida Cordova, Winterspell by Claire Legrand, and Give the Dark My Love by Beth Rivas. She works in video game development for the Deep End Games and is currently working on their next title. In her spare time, she enjoys playing the game BioShock and the drums with her musician husband. Errick Nunnally was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts, and served one tour in the Marine Corps before departing for art school. He's the author of the novels Lightning Wears a Red Cape, Blood for the Sun, and All the Dead Men, and his writing has appeared in several anthologies and magazines, including FIA Literary Magazine, Lamplight, Transcendent, Monarchies of Mao, among others. He enjoys art, comics, and genre novels, and works as a designer by day and kickboxer by night. Remember, throughout tonight's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions and join the conversation by clicking the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. And you can find Survivor Song for purchase at Books and Books below by pressing the green button. Every purchase you make enables Books and Books to continue offering great work on the page and in discussion. And now, without further ado, welcome Paul, Kat, and Errick. There you go.
1, 2.
3. Hey, okay.
Oh,
There you go.
It's like a Sesame Street.
So used to hearing thunderous applause when this happens, but it's so different online.
It is. Right, we're pretending we're in Miami. We're all in Miami, everybody. I hope you
We
have
are.
a great day at the beach. Yeah, so we're going to treat this as like a co-moderated. We're going to have a discussion because Errick, Kat, and I all know each other. Each of us have books coming out in July. So I thought it'd be a fun, we're just going to start off by asking each other questions, and then eventually we'll open it up. So let's start off easy, though. Let's have each of us maybe just briefly describe your book that's coming out in July. I'll go first since I'm already yapping. So Survivor Song just came out on Tuesday, and it's sort of my riff on a zombie, or not really a zombie. Don't listen to the New York Times. They called it a zombie novel. It's more an infected novel, but anyway. It really focuses on 4 to 6 hours during an outbreak of a super rabies virus in the suburban Boston area. And then the novel sort of zeroes in on two friends, Dr. Romola Sherman, who's Anglo-Indian. She's a pediatrician, and her best friend, or a friend she met in college, Natalie. Natalie is 8 months pregnant, and in the very beginning of the novel, something terrible happens in her house, and she needs Romola's help, to get to a hospital and maybe get a rabies shot because she's been bitten. So I don't want to say too much from there without spoiling anything, but it really just focuses on those two women trying to navigate the hellscape that we've all become very familiar with now in 2020, unfortunately. All right, so let's move on to, how about Kat next?
Okay. Hi, I'm Kat Scully. As my bio said, I'm a writer and illustrator. This is my first book, even though I've been published for illustration before, but this is my first illustrated novel. It's part journal, part novel, where I tell the story about two sisters, and they each have a dark power that they're trying to figure out together. It's basically within the genre of supernatural and Buffy and like The Conjuring. I wanted to do something with wisecracking sisters that was slightly gory, where they're going and like fighting demons and ghosts. And Jennifer's power is she's able to touch a ghost and give them a body. Like if a ghost was just floating by, she could give them a body. But if a demon was possessing a host, she can rip the host right out of them, or like rip the demon right out of the host. So it's a very horrible power to have, and she's trying to figure it out while she's been dumped in Savannah with her older sister, and they're basically running around trying to figure out while the clock's ticking, because every time Jennifer crosses over a ghost or demon, her body slowly slips away to the other side. So part of it's a novel from Jennifer's perspective. The other part is her journal that's passed down from her father, explaining their family history and who they were and like why they're fighting these things. So yeah, I'm excited. It's going to come out in less than 2 weeks.
All right. Mr. Nunnally.
All right. Well, I'm Errick Nunnally. My novel coming out this month is called All the Dead Men. It's actually the second in a series of a trilogy about a character named Alexander Smith, who's a long-lived werewolf who has a kind of supernatural Alzheimer's. And if you know anything about these memory loss types of diseases, you kind of need to stay active. And he's come up with this idea that if he searches for or solves cases of murdered or missing children, then that's going to help to keep his mind intact. So the second novel involves an underground vampire church. It follows some events from the first, but it doesn't necessarily need to be read in order. And it's very much what I would consider a horror thriller. It's a little noirish, a little detective, a little mystery. And that's the book. I'm really excited to have it coming out. It took a lot to get there.
No, and I read Eric's. I haven't read the first book, and I read the second book, All the Dead Men, the one that's coming out, and I had no problem, figuring out the story and dealing with the characters. And that's typically, I'm not much of a series reader, but that's usually how I do it. I don't know why. I'm just like a contrarian. I'm going to read the second book, not the first one.
See how they did.
Yeah. All right. So how about, since we just introduced our books, I think an obvious question would be, let's have everybody, and I'll do it last after you two go. Do you remember what the spark was for this particular book, or moment of inspiration or moment of eureka where you knew, okay, this is the book I'm going to work on. This is the thing I'm going to write.
I do. It's very, it's got there's a little bit of odd history involved to it. Like, first of all, I went to art school and I trained as a graphic designer, but for more than a few years, it was mostly illustration. And I painted 3 pages with the main characters in the book, Alexander, his adopted daughter, and a very older, much more dangerous vampire. And it was literally just for fun. And a friend of mine liked it, and we talked about it, and we talked about expanding it into a comic book, and kind of nothing came of that. And it sat fallow for several years, almost a decade. And I got laid off from a job, and I was I was unemployed. Well, I worked for myself for about a year. And one of the things I decided I was going to do was to write this down. So I finally wrote the novel. And that was the first one came together in that way. And the weird bit about the novel is that, so the character, Alexander, I created him as the son of an escaped slave and a First Nations woman from Saskatchewan, from the Kainai Nation, the Blood. And the father is supposed to have escaped from slavery in Louisiana and fled up the Mississippi River all the way into Canada and then headed further northwest. And a couple of years ago, I don't really know my family's background. Like we just don't know. That's kind of the way it is. If you're the descendants of people who were enslaved here, you kind of lose your whole family history. And it turns out we had a cousin that we didn't know about nearby who spent a lot of time figuring this out. And it's mostly his branch of the family, but parts of it reach my immediate family. But we come to find out that my great-grandfather escaped slavery and fought in the Civil War and eventually met a woman of Moss-Watusa descent. So he married a Native American woman, and that's kind of where part of the branch of the family comes from. It was really stunning to find out. And that really, it helped to continue to fuel the story, I think. It really reignited my interest in it.
Wow. Good luck, Kat, following that.
I know, right? I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to follow that? So mine was just out of pressure to get an assignment done for college. I can't follow that. So I primarily studied screenwriting in my undergrad because like the one guy who taught fiction writing did not want to deal with any genre fiction, like any horror, any science fiction, any fantasy. And so I went, I'm going to go to the screenwriting department where they let me do whatever I want. And I'm going to go write something for that. And I wrote all these short little scripts and I had so much fun. And I didn't realize like I was actually talented at it until the teacher said, okay, no, we're actually going to put you in the highest level class, which is TV pilot writing. So I jumped from beginner to TV pilot and I didn't watch TV at all. I was just like, okay, I want to keep doing this, so I'll do it. And I went in and I pitched this story about a skeptic and a believer solving supernatural cases. Again, I haven't watched TV, so I didn't know like what the X-Files was or anything. So my teacher went, okay, go back to your dorm room and check it out from the library and do not come back until you have like a pitch. So I went and I don't know why I thought of it, but I was reading Watchmen by Alan Moore and it just, these characters popped in my head of what I wanted to do. And I drew Jennifer, I drew Marcus, and I drew Miriam. And that became the basis for the story. And I came back. And originally it was about both of their perspectives. I wrote the pilot where it was about Marcus and his ghost hunting family. And then it was about Jennifer with her aunt, being stuck with her aunt, and they don't really know each other, and they're trying to figure out why this other rival ghost hunting family is hunting them. And I kind of just left it when I graduated. I wrote the pilot, really loved it. I never forgot about it though. I have to move out to LA probably to get the script made. And at the time I had just interned at Cartoon Network. I moved back to Atlanta and was trying to get back in, but that's when the market crashed in 2009. So there were no new jobs at Turner. So I freelanced with them, and it wasn't until my son was born I got the courage to go, I'm going to turn this into a book. So I turned it into a book while I was on maternity leave. I queried it. I got an agent when I was I started querying 3 months postpartum, got an agent 6 months postpartum, and I've been working on it and trying to get it in print for the whole time he's been born. He's now 8. So it's been an 11-year journey with this idea to finally hold it in my hands. It's been through a lot of different iterations. I've had so many different ideas. Marcus's point of view was totally cut. Now it's just Jennifer. Instead of the aunt, it became the like sister relationship. I turned it YA middle grade. It's been a whole bunch of different things. I'm just happy it's done.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the start of Survivor Saga for me is much more mercenary. But so I had a 3-book deal with William Morrow, my publisher, and the first one of that deal was The Cabin at the End of the World. And my bright idea was, hey, I'll give him Cabin, a short story collection in between, because most of the stories are already written, and that will give me more time to work on the unnamed third novel, because it was a 3-book deal. So it didn't quite work out that way, because I had to write some originals for the short story collection, and I don't know, I was procrastinating, and like my supposed 2 years to write the next novel became 1 year in a blink of an eye. Part of the issue was I had an idea for another novel that was going to be really big and messy, and I just kept putting it off, and which became obviously me trying to tell myself I either didn't want to write this or I wasn't ready to write it. So fast forward to July of 2018. My unnamed book is due August 2019. And so I was in England, July 2018. But the first time I've ever been off the North American continent. My British publisher had sent me over for a tour. Very nice of them to do a book tour. So there I was with my publicist and friend Lydia, getting on a train in between British cities, and I'm trying to figure out, oh man, what am I going to do? Like, I got to come up with a novel. So I had to write. I had a little notebook out. I don't know about you guys, but I use little notebooks like this. I don't write longhand, but this is where I brainstorm or jot down ideas. And I've got like 9 or 10 of these, all different colors, and I lose them. So part of the fun is when I find them, I'm like, oh, what's in this one? But if
you can't lose them, they're going to be in your library one day.
Yeah. But once I have I'm on a novel, then that one notebook becomes okay. That's the notebook for this novel, and then I don't lose that one. Anyway, so I'm sitting on a train in England, and some of my previous books, I basically took like a horror trope like Possession and tried to mess around with it. Home invasion. So I wrote down zombie. Like most people nowadays, I went like everyone is sick of them. Everyone says that, but then they still watch and read zombie stuff. But
yeah,
then I wrote down what's that?
Everyone has one zombie story in them. Everyone.
Yeah.
One.
And then I wrote down a what if that I can't say because the what if would totally spoil the book. So when I wrote down the what if, and it was like, okay, so how would I do this quasi zombie novel? And one of the things I guess I usually try to do is even if there's no supernatural element in this, but even in the previous books, I tried to root it in as much reality as possible. So like, how can I make this something that could seem like it could actually happen? And so rabies as a virus instantly occurred to me. I had happened to a couple years prior listen to an audiobook about rabies, as horror writers do, I suppose. just for fun. And it's such an insane virus. Like there's really nothing like it. So, in the book, I move up the timeline of infection for rabies. Usually, if you were to get bit in the arm by something rabid, it would take weeks, maybe even more than a month for you to become fully infected. Whereas in my novel, it'll take an hour. In rabies, the virus attaches to your nerves. It's not in your blood at all. There's no blood test for rabies, etc. It crawls up your nerves until it passes through the brain barrier. And once rabies passes through the brain barrier, there is no cure now in 2020. But as long as you get a vaccine before it goes to the brain, you're good. The problem is you don't exhibit any symptoms unless it passes through the brain barrier. So that's why, like, if you get bit by something and you're not sure, you just have to go get vaccinated because you're not going to know until it's too late. Anyway, so rabies sort of occurred to me instantly, and then I ended up using the other two things before I throw it out, and you guys can ask a question. The only two other things I knew I wanted to do. I knew I did not want to write a zombie novel that featured a cast of thousands and point of views jumping from 10 to 15 characters. There's nothing wrong with those stories, but I feel like we've seen so many of those and so many of those done so well. Like I wanted to try to go a little bit opposite of that and really tightly focus in on two people over a small period of time. And the other thing I knew I didn't want to do is I didn't want to do like a big explosive post-apocalyptic thing where like the detail of the destruction is like almost fetishistically portrayed, you know, because again, I feel like we've seen that a bunch. You know, I even say in the book that this isn't an apocalypse. Like this is not a spoiler. I say this in the book. This is not the end of the world. And to me, that kind of felt. I hoped it would make it more poignant, and you know, and obviously for the characters who don't make it, more tragic, because if they could have just held on for like, you know, a few more weeks to a month, then you know they would have survived as well. So those were sort of like my starting points for the book. Yeah, and I got it done. I finished it August 15th. The date was due, 2019.
Well, I definitely have a question for you, Paul.
Okay.
Well, first a clarifying point. Like the reason why I think everyone has at least one zombie story in them, either it's a short story or a novel, is because it's inevitably not zombie, right? So what Paul did was, you know, he basically came up with his own way of inverting humanity and isolating people in a crisis, right? And I think everybody's going to stumble into that at some point. They'll have some idea to do it. But something Kat said earlier made me wonder. So with your first novel, it seems most often that people, it's kind of chaotic writing your first novel. It goes through a gazillion revisions. You hate it, you love it. You think you had a good idea, you destroy it, you rebuild it. What was your first novel, and what's the process like that for you?
So like the first one that got published, or like the first one that no one's ever going to see the light of day of?
I think the first one that got published, because that's the one that you honed enough to actually live.
Sure. Yeah. You know, and you know, I think it's important, especially if they're, you know, writers that are just starting out that are, you know, watching now. Like, so my first novel that got published was the 4.5 one that I'd written. You know, one I put in the trunk happily, one a half I abandoned. One was too weird. I eventually published it later with a small publisher, but it wasn't ready at that time. And then one was good enough to get my agent, but we were unable to sell it. You know, with short stories, it's easier to put those away when they don't work, right? But with a novel, it's like, oh my God, I spent so much time on this thing. So with the first one, you know, with the big publishers with me, it's always been like, you finish your draft, you try to make it as good as possible, and when you send it to your editor, you get the sometimes dreaded, editorial letter. It's like the official letter from the editor, because you're like bound contractually to address, you know, your editor's edits. And obviously, depending on your relationship with the editor, it doesn't have to be that sort of bureaucratic. But you know, my very first novel, like all the edits came officially, like printed out, like page this is the edits, you know, that you need to address in some way. So, you know, and that process hasn't changed a ton. Like with my editor, Jennifer at William Morrow, is wonderful. You know, she doesn't send the whole big letter. She usually just sends me the marked up manuscript, which I find much more helpful. I like seeing it like in the context of the pages. But maybe I've been lucky, because I haven't had a ton of different editors. I guess with my first go around with major publishers, I had an editor who acquired me, but then she left to work somewhere else, which is always bad. Because, you know, whoever comes in, you know, they're a nice person, but their professional, their reputation's not on the line with your book, right? Like if you acquire someone's book and their book does bad, that's sort of on you as the editor. But if you swoop in and take someone, yeah, they're not as invested. So anyway, with my first two books that were crime books, that sort of happened.
So what was the first novel? And I meant in terms of your own development of it, not necessarily the editing process. Like you had to go through a lot to prepare it for an editor to tear it to pieces.
Yeah, so the first one that was published was called The Little Sleep, and that was in 2009. And really, my part of the process hasn't changed a ton. Like I don't really use my agent as an editor. I know a lot of people use their agent to like go through their manuscript. And you know, I have an editor. Like that's the person I need to please. You know, it doesn't have to be my agent. I kind of feel like it's. But like a great writer like Sarah Langan loves that her agents, you know, goes through her stuff. So it's whatever your personal preference there. But for me, you know, as I write, I'm always editing, which, you know, so I go really slowly. Like I wish I was someone who could just like spill it all out and then do like drafts, but I can't. I go like 1 or 2 pages a day if I'm lucky, and then I'll re-edit those pages before I start the next day. And if it's a novel, I typically start at the beginning of whatever chapter that's in. So, you know, I move very slowly forward. with re-editing as I go. So the final draft or the first complete draft that I have is usually pretty much what ends up. Well, I'll say it's cleanish. I'm not going to say for like copy edits and stuff like that, but from my point of view, when I hand it into my editor, there's only one book I feel like I've handed into my editor that was a mess. Like all the 7 of my other 8 novels, I felt like, okay, there may be some changes, but when I handed Disappearance of Devil's Rock to Jen, I basically said, help me. And she did. I'm very thankful for that.
I'm surprised to hear that's your process. I didn't know that. I didn't know you sort of hammered it out as you went. That's I know a few people that do that, and they seem to find it agonizing, actually writing, because they're like, I can't leave that behind. I have to go fix it. It's like, no. I'm like, I have to get to the end.
Well, I was just saying there's no seam. It's agonizing. No. I don't have trouble like leaving it, but that's not usually my sort of anxiety. I don't know. It's just always hard for everybody. It's always hard just to bring yourself to the chair when there's so many other distractions and other things that you can be doing. It's more fun. I mean,
television, right, Kat?
Yeah.
What?
Like television, right, Kat?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So even if I don't have deadlines, like I'll impose them on myself as a way to try to motivate me to get it going.
That's good.
But yeah, I'm jealous of people who, like I said, who can just get it all out and then redraft. Because when I have a full draft, that's when I'm the happiest. And then I can tinker with it, and I'm much less anxiety riddled about tinkering with the drafts. Because at least I knew I could get to the completed end or a completed end. Yeah. How about you, Kat? What's your process like?
That was one of my questions was, we all end up with the same end result, but the path looks extraordinarily different from author to author. Like I was very curious what you were mentioning earlier, writing in journals, and I don't know, a very weird process, but I'm wondering like what both of yours are as well. So I'll tell you what mine is, and then I'd love to hear what you two do, because I'm always looking kind of for new techniques, even though I have a set way that I work. It's always interesting to hear someone else's, because you never know, like I might try that. So whenever I have an idea for a book, I have to write out like a beat sheet, like a TV show, every single beat of that book before I sit down to write it. I go through and I have a chapter and I just put like bullet points of what I think is going to happen and what I think is going to happen. And the reason I do this is because I get so many ideas. Like I'm this person that's like, oh, shiny, 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 like I do 50 things at once. I'm always reading 10 books at the same time. And so for me to ground myself from being all up in my headspace and to actually get like not be afraid of the blank page, I have to write down, okay, I had this great thought. I'm going to put it down on paper. It makes it more concrete. And then I start writing that chapter. And if I get stuck, I tend to be very forgiving. Like if I can't figure out what's going to happen next, I'll just write up to what I've bulleted pointed out. I'll just write it. And then I'll usually figure out within the storytelling, because I don't always adhere. Like, even though I write this whole thing, I don't stick to it if something else feels more natural when I'm actually in the process, and that will change the direction. So I keep a little journal of all of these. It kind of looks like, I've always loved Guillermo del Toro movies, not just because of his movies, but his journals, because they look just like mine. They're full of drawings. They're full of notes. They're full of these little like ideas like, oh, what if I found this in my research? What if I put that in here? What if I put that in there? So I think Jennifer Strange has maybe 5 journals with how long I've worked on it, but I could never figure out the ending because it felt like so much bigger. Like I kept going, all right, I need to sell this as a standalone with series potential. So I really struggled with how to end it. And I actually drew out the ending in kind of like a comic form, which is how I came about, oh, maybe I could just put that in there and put what I'm seeing in my head, these storyboards, into the book. And that's how these little like 1-page comic panels came about. But recently I've been trying longhand. And the reason is because now that I'm moving from, okay, trying to get published into I have to sell a book, it's a lot easier to get my thoughts out on paper when I'm not constantly checking my email to see like, oh, like who I need someone to get back to me. I need to respond to this blog post. I need to do this or that. And then when I do it longhand, just whatever thoughts, they tend to be more flowery and more without anything else. I hear myself. So I'm trying out that method and it's working really well so far. What about you two? What's your process look like? What have you found works or doesn't work for you?
I wish I could fill a journal or something like that. I mean, my writing, the longer I write, the more incomprehensible it becomes. So I'm joking, but being able to donate your papers at the end of your career to someplace, if you have a successful career, is kind of a fantasy, and it's a fantasy because I'll never be able to do it. I'll write what's essentially a synopsis. Like synopses and back cover copy isn't that difficult for me, and I know a lot of people struggle to do that once they've created the book because I've already done it. I usually will have written essentially a synopsis on paper and then start breaking it into pieces and outline, but by then it's electronic. So like in Scrivener, it does the electronic equivalent of a index cards, which I love because then I can move things around. I can move sections, move chapters, move sections around. And then along the way, there's a lot of research that gets attached to it in the form of PDFs, notes, websites, any little thing. So I am sprinting to the end of the book and then going back. So it's like sculpting or combing through something. And I try to skip past those things that I don't know, but sometimes that becomes a little detour into research, where you're suddenly, now I'm reading about this particular subject, so I can write it so that it doesn't sound like I just completely made this up. But a lot of electronic ephemera, I'll never be able to have papers.
I wish I used Scrivener, sort of, but I'm just like Microsoft Word, and then like the scraps I write on pieces of paper. I mean, I already talked about it a little bit, but I will say I do for not every novel, but for most of them, I do write some sort of outline first, and it's usually just a plot outline. And some of them sometimes are pretty detailed. Some of them are very loose. Head Full of Ghosts, I did not write an outline. I felt like I just sort of knew most of the story in my head. I kept a notebook as I went. For Survivor Song, I wrote really sort of like a half-assed outline. So I didn't want to necessarily. It was only like 3 pages, and I really only outlined like the first 100 pages, and I sort of hand waved at what the rest of the book would be. But my editor wanted to see something. It's like, fine, here you go.
Do you think at this point maybe you're just comfortable enough with the process that you can hand wave at things, knowing that you'll fill them in confidently?
Well, I sort of, with novels anyway, typically what I do is I know the beginning and I know the ending. The ending might be a little bit hazy, not like the actual ending that it becomes, but I know the beginning and most of the ending. And so for me, the book is how do I get from A to Z the whole time. I'm jealous of the idea. It's a cool idea being able to move chapters around. I have to go, even for my books that are not linear, I have to write it in the order in which I think it's going to happen. Maybe that's the math teacher part of me.
When I wrote Lightning Wears a Red Cape, there was an editorial change. Can you move this chapter further ahead, and can you add a chapter? And by then it's in Word, right? It went from Scrivener to Word because it had been turned in. It was a nightmare. So
in that novel, Lightning Wears a Red Cape, is a wonderful, gritty adult superhero novel, which I don't think I've ever read an adult superhero novel before. I was enthralled. It was amazing. Do you guys have any burning questions? Because we're already at like 7:30, and I do want to go through sort of the fun rapid fire lightning round questions. But if you guys had a question that was burning that you really wanted to ask ourselves before we do the lightning round.
I was wondering how it felt because I didn't realize until this talk that the three of us have something in common. We all wrote something that was eerily synchronous to our lives. And I wanted to know, like Eric was talking about that earlier, about his test. He had no idea. And then the coronavirus and Paul. And with mine, I wrote about ghosts like, oh, ghosts are fun topic to write about. And then I actually saw some.
No, you did?
Yes, I did. And that was
sorry
after
to
I
hear that.
wrote Jennifer Strange. So it was not inspired by it. It just happened. So I would love for all of us to talk about that before the lightning round, like how it felt like as writers, we explore these what if scenarios, but then when there's some part of your life where like, oh, wow, that actually like happened. How weird is that? How does that feel?
I'm still not
We
sure
both
how
were
I
like,
feel. Yeah, no, I'm still not sure quite how I feel. You know, because obviously, like me, the act of writing the book did not like conjure up the coronavirus. I mean,
no.
Are
I
you
Didn't summon
sure?
it.
know. You know, and a lot of what people describe as quote unquote prescient in the book has been out there forever. I mean, we all knew that a pandemic was a matter of when, not if. You know, and some of the stuff that I have in the book talking about right wing, you know, conspiracy theories, that really wasn't that difficult to forecast if we were to have a virus. I think if anything, I misjudged how mainstream that would become. Um, you know, it wasn't difficult to forecast that if a virus like that were to happen and we had the current jackass president and administration, that it would be a total shit show. And again, I think, you know, I underestimated how much it would, you know, of a shit show it would be. But you know, the thing that's on the personal level, that's like, I don't know, that pulls at my own heartstrings is, you know, I mentioned that my sister really helped me with research for the book. She's a nurse at one of the biggest hospitals in Boston. You know, I wanted to focus on the local response, so we looked at our hospital's, you know, epidemic response plans. But the biggest thing that became the really sort of quote unquote prescient part of the book was in 2014, the 2014 Ebola outbreak. You know, it obviously was much bigger in Liberia in Africa, but we had a few patients in the United States, and a nurse got infected, I think, in Dallas and Atlanta.
There was a bit of a panic here, but
yeah, and there was actually even one in Boston, I think. And so, for whatever reason, her hospital decided they were going to be the ones that take patients if they start getting inundated. And the first like plan the hospital sent out to my sister and her coworkers was lacking, shall we say. It was like a 15-minute PowerPoint and a PDF, and you know, they weren't going to have hazmat suits. They said, "Oh, you'll double gown up and duct tape your wrists." And you know, and my sister and her friends were, you know, coworkers were freaking out. For people who read the book, there's a text exchange between nurses, and that text exchange really was inspired by and came from their reacting to the prospect of not having, the first time I had ever heard the phrase, correct PPE to deal with Ebola. You know, happily it didn't happen, and happily before it didn't happen, the hospital came to their senses and said, no, we'll take volunteers and everyone will have the proper equipment, etc. So I don't know, like when it started hitting us, you know, in February and March, like, you know, my first concern, obviously, besides everybody in my family, but my sister, who's in the middle of it, it was just hard to, you know, when people are asking me about the book, I didn't even want to talk about it in March or April, because I was just thinking of, you know, all the time I spent with my sister, you know, figuring out how I was going to write certain things for the book. So, I mean, she and her hospital did, you know, all things considered well in this first wave, you know, but she lives in dread of, you know, pretty much the inevitability of the second wave. Yeah, so it's been a little bit weird. I mean, I do like that for readers. I feel like most readers take a measure of hope from the book. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like in real life, obviously, it's yet to be written. You know, I try to be hopeful, but I don't know. Didn't mean to bring everybody down. Sorry.
I think everybody has written a pandemic of some sort. You know, had a published one in the last few months. It's like, well, oh my God, you know, they're feeling very strange about it. I did have another weird little parallel, actually, more recent one. So you mentioned seeing a ghost, cat, and you know, when people say, some people are highly skeptical of something like this, but I kind of learned with my kids, and not to say everybody's children, but if they say something, it's just best to take it at face value. Like if they say they saw a ghost, okay, you saw a ghost, and you know, as long as that ghost isn't telling you that I'm supposed to give you $500 or something, fine. Right? That's your experience. I can't knock it. So we moved to Providence a few years ago, in the town we used to live in. My daughter says that she saw a ghost in that house. And I remember the incident, but it hadn't come up until recently. Recently, she made a little drawing of what she said she saw, what she remembers seeing. And I don't know if that's even visible.
Let's see it.
Okay, so the weird connection there is that the third book in the Alexander Smith trilogy is called The Headless Woman,
Oh, wow.
and it's something that looks like that.
Yeah.
That particular that character, that aspect. So I was like, all right, well, that's exactly what she looks like now.
And the ghost that cat saw was the headless woman.
Yeah, so that's happening.
Do you want to tell us about your ghost quickly, or should we go right to
Yeah, it's a quick story.
Okay, sure.
I was with my friend Jen. I think it was definitely before I got married, after I had graduated college, just that window. And we decided, oh, we're just going to go do weird things around town. Like, oh, there's a ghost tour. Let's go do it. And it was in Roswell, Georgia, just south of where I grew up in Alpharetta. And we were like walking around. I had been down that street, that area a million times. But it was really cool to go learn about the history. My family's really big into history. I'm like, this is great. I'll just go for that. And she was like determined. She brought her camera. I'm going to find a ghost orb. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if those exist, but I'm going to go learn about history. It's going to be fun walking tour. And we get up to the Founders Cemetery, and the tour guide kind of like lets everybody wander around the headstones, and we all kind of disperse, and Jen and I go off. And I don't know where Jen is. I'm just like looking at this old tree. Like, this is a really cool old tree and all these cool headstones. And then I feel somebody walk up to my right, and I turn and thinking it's Jen because we'd wandered off from the group, just us. And it's like, hey, Jen. And there's this girl who walks a foot away from me and disappears around the tree, like into thin air. She was completely white. She had a blonde bob. She was shorter than my friend Jen. Jen's taller than me, and she was about this high. And then the tour guide says, oh, yeah, you see where that girl's standing over there by the tree? There's this young girl who sometimes shows herself to people if they come near the tree. And I was like, I ran up to the tour guide and said, I just saw her. I didn't even have it in my mind. I didn't think that's what I'd see. I was like, I saw her. And she's like, oh, yeah, she shows up almost every tour. But yeah,
And nobody looked this up?
she comes out. And I was like, okay, I guess they're real now. I still can't believe what I saw. Like, but yeah, it was a foot away. There was like no, she's somewhere far off behind a curtain or whatever, like down a hall. She was right here, like this close.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And nobody's looked this up to see where this could have come from or who this might be?
I think that usually people see the founder of Roswell. Like, I've seen people take pictures of him, but not of her. So I don't know who she is. But she's somebody buried there, I guess.
She demanded
She's
that
in like colonial dress.
Huh? I said the ghost demanded that Errick Nunnally pay me $500.
That's right. That's right. Then she'll appear for you. But first, you pay the tour fee.
All right.
The check is in the mail, Paul.
So before we go to audience questions, the dreaded rapid fire. I only have 7, so it's not that bad.
Oh, exciting.
There's no explanations. There's no fighting. There's no groaning, no complaining. You just have to answer. I will answer 2. Okay? So rapid fire. First one, Coke or Pepsi?
Coke.
Coke.
Coke. Algebra or geometry?
Algebra.
Help. Geometry.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Tea. Favorite video game?
BioShock.
Juno.
Ooh.
Castlevania for me. Sorry. Old.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Transylvania 3. Juno is an arcade game. You had to put quarters in it.
Ah. All right. Sorry. Movie or book that has given you the most nightmares?
Movie.
No, like you got to name the movie or the book.
I have to name the movie?
Yeah, name the movie or the book that's giving you the most nightmares. I'll answer it first to give you guys a chance to think, since I already wrote these questions out. But it's not even close for me. It's Jaws. After seeing it when I was 11, I'm not exaggerating. I had until about 17 years old, so 6 years of shark nightmares. Every dream I had, I would end up in the water. The shark would attack me.
The Incredible Melting Man, and I saw that the same night I saw Jaws at a drive-in. But it was The Incredible Melting Man, and like.
Mine's tied. I have two. Either I have Frank the Bunny from Donnie Darko stalking me in my dreams when I'm stressed, or I get the shark warehouse dream where I'm jumping from platform to platform in an empty warehouse and there's a shark that keeps coming up like Killer Croc in like Batman video game, just like that. That was so stressful.
That's right. You like the shark stories. Have you seen that one that takes place in Australia after a tidal wave?
Which one?
Just like your dream. I can't remember the name of it though. There's a tidal wave.
Tell me later. I will watch it.
They're trapped in like a warehouse type store.
I must see it. Tell me later. Okay, I'm excited.
Book, film, or comic, because I know Eric's a big comic fan. Book, film, or comic you wish you wrote?
Harrow County. I didn't even have to think. I'm a big comic person too. I'm like obsessed with that comic.
Eric's thinking, so I'll say mine is Take Shelter. It's a movie with Michael Shannon and Jessica Chastain. It's really quiet movie, really intense. I wish, if even now, if someone would pay me to write the novelization of that movie, I would happily do it.
I was trying to remember the name of the thing. It's a Planetary. It's a comic book. Planetary.
Okay. Planetary.
Planetary, yeah. I have the omnibus, and I keep thinking omnibus. That's not the name. Planetary.
All right, last lightning round question. What is your favorite article of clothing? Like, you can't say like slippers. It's got to be like a specific.
The duster. I'm wearing one right now.
You're wearing it right now?
Yes, I'm wearing one of my dusters right now.
Well, it's definitely a t-shirt.
Yeah, same for me.
This is terrible. I think it's a t-shirt. It's a t-shirt that I designed. And it has a multicolored wheel that represents sort of the history of music all the way up to the inception of hip hop, punk, and metal at the same time.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
I love that shirt.
Oh.
I want that shirt. That's a cool shirt.
My current favorite shirt, my favorite band, the band that changed my life is a band called Husker Du, a punk band from the 80s. And there's a donut shop in LA that makes donuts and names them after old like post-punk bands.
Really?
And so they have a blueberry donut that they call Husker Blue instead of Husker Du. And my kids and Lisa bought me the Husker Blue t-shirt. So it looks like a Husker Du t-shirt, except it says Husker Blue, and on the back it says the donut place. So that's currently my favorite t-shirt. All right.
That's pretty cool. I know nothing about punk, but I love donuts.
Punk and donuts.
Right. I never would have thought. They collided.
Come together.
You have any questions?
No, we've got a bunch. I'm trying to see the first one. It says, do you think that MCs of color will sell now? What with Get Out, Us, Attack the Block doing well? I feel a bit guilty that as a Black writer, I have major secondary characters of color, Black, Asian, but not my MCs. I know it's tempting to say yes and hope, but do you think this could really be the time?
Oh, MCs, main characters.
Yeah, main characters. Thank you for translating the.
I was like master of ceremonies. That's a hip hop question.
Geez, I don't know if I certainly don't have the answer. I share her hope that I think, there's certainly is changing. I think, horror likes to pat itself on the back. I think a little bit too much, saying that we're so welcoming and inviting, and we clearly have a long way to go, to achieving that, welcoming space, that the quote unquote horror community talks about. I do think, just last week, not a Black woman, but she is, a Mexican, but Silvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic was a New York Times bestseller. So, whether that changes of the moment or, I mean, I'm a little bit more optimistic. I do think that is sort of what we're going to see in the future. At least I certainly hope. I don't know, you guys, something around it. We have to add to that.
I think there are plenty of writers, unpublished and published authors of color producing the work, but I think it actually takes a number of people to bring a piece of art to sale, right, for commercial purposes. And I think all aspects of the industry are going to need to become more diverse. I do think right now things occasionally align very well for some people, and that's great. Like Silvia Moreno Garcia. For that to happen, there had to be a number of people who believed in what that was and get it out there and help make that happen. So I think that's when it's just over time. That's as long as we keep making progress, not just beyond this moment, not just this moment, but beyond.
No, and to your point, she had spoken like I think it was one of her first agents or editors years ago, and told her like, "Oh, you'll never be like a bestseller," with no context beyond, that beyond. Huh.
Well, maybe that agent just didn't believe that could happen. I think you need someone, like Eric was saying, that really wants to champion this. Like, it's so much better when you have someone that says, let me open that door for you. And you got to find those people that open the doors. And I do think there's been an effort recently to open more doors, and I hope that continues. I hope that spirit that we saw a lot of in June actually keeps going, because I think it's just horrible that, feeling like, oh, I can't submit this, I can't ever become a bestseller or get published, like, just because I'm a person of color. No, please submit your work. That's what I think.
All right, the next one up, gear shifting somewhat, but this was something I was going to ask. It's sort of like a good question for a horror crowd. What draws you to the weird or weird/horror?
Go, Paul.
Part of it would be I don't know, because I really can't remember a moment in my life where I wasn't interested in scary things, or I wasn't terrified by scary things. Like, to the point where I have a hard time understanding, like, when I meet someone, it's like, oh yeah, I don't do horror at all. Like, I have a hard time understanding, like, really, what do you mean? Not at all? Like, you haven't seen this or read that? I mean, as a kid, my earliest memories of watching TV were a Creature double feature in, the local Boston area. So movies for me was my first entrance into it. And I don't know. I mean, my favorite kind of horror stories always feel honest to me. I think you could boil down all art as to a reveal, like the purpose of the art is to reveal a truth. And in a horror story, it doesn't even have to be a horror story to reveal a terrible truth, but typically in a horror story, there's a reveal of a horrific or a terrible truth. It could be social, it could be personal, it could be universal. And I just always remain fascinated by that reveal and then what the horror story can do with it afterwards. So my favorite stories have that reveal, not at the end, but maybe at the 2/3 point. And then the last part of the book is, how do the characters now deal with this? I don't know, because I kind of feel like that mirrors existence for us. Like, how does anyone live through that? How do we live through this? So I don't know. That's what draws me to weird horror. There you go. Eric and Katz on that one?
I was wondering what Eric's answer is.
Mine has always been sort of a rejection of the mundane. As far back as I can remember, the only things that were interesting is things that weren't real life, and then later on discovering that there's so many those truths that you mentioned, Paul, are in horror in particular, usually the ones that are creating traumas or breaking people. And the people that survive, they put them in a box and they put it on the shelf. It's always with them, and they move forward. And that's one of the things that I do like to write about, but I also would prefer that it would have some fantastical elements. Like, just mundane stories weren't terribly interesting. I don't want to read about a bad relationship that doesn't have anything else going on that's beyond what we live day to day.
I think for me, I really am drawn to stories with monsters and with horror because it allows me to talk about things I don't otherwise feel like I can talk about. Like Jennifer Strange for me was about growing up queer in the South and how hard it was. And I used the entire world of Jennifer as a metaphor for what I went through. And I felt like it was so much easier to say it with that than it was to just write contemporary. So it was almost like a way to tell those truths like you were talking about, Paul. Like I like getting to the heart of that. And I liked, being able to explore it. But I also just think it's fun. Like it's fun to talk about monsters. It's fun to write them. It's fun to watch girls get to fight monsters because like I I was really it was really big in the South for me that, girls don't get into fights. And so I spent all of my freshman, sophomore year on the fencing team getting into fights. And I would take on guys twice my size with a sword. And I loved that. Like I loved being able to do that. And I loved to, when I was reading it, imagine that that could be me. And so that's part of why I write what I write, is so more people can feel empowered in what might otherwise be a powerless situation. Horror really lends itself well to, okay, here's a situation where you might feel powerless, but here's how you can handle that anxiety.
I'm writing down, do not fight cat in a sword fight.
Oh my God.
I am interested in your answer to this, because it used to be like one of my least favorite questions, but I found it become actually one of my favorite ones now to hear other writers talk about. Anyway, someone asks, what do you do to combat writer's block?
Who wants to go first?
What's writer's block?
Yeah, well, I mean, I know some people say, yeah, there's no such thing. So
Eric doesn't get writer's block.
Well, for me, a lot of deadlines help. I also just like literally force myself to sit. Like, all right, I'm gonna sit here for an hour, and if it's just a blinking cursor after an hour, it's like I'm punishing myself in an old school kind of way. Typically, my subconscious will like pout for 5 or 10 minutes, but I've never sat a full hour and have no words happen. It's, maybe it's 100 words, maybe it's not many. I had a friend, Stuart Onan, who's an amazing novelist, told me he used to literally, same way, he would belt himself into his chair, so he couldn't leave. But my two favorite answers, one's kind of funny, and it's Stephen Graham Jones. He said, there's no, writer's block just means your standards are too high. I love that.
I love that.
And then Michael Sisko, who's American Kafka genius writer, just writes really strange stuff. He says, no, when you get to the spot where you're totally stuck, he's like, that means you're onto something. That means, this is the moment. This is the thing. You should welcome those moments, because that's like at that point in the story where you're really struggling. He's like, that you were broken through to something really important.
Yeah, those are really,
so
both of those are really great.
Yeah.
Yeah, both of those are really great. I think if I hit some point like that, I do something the opposite of creating a story. So, make progress on something else. And, I just let the back mind work on it, and it just bubbles up eventually, the solution. It's, I think if you are actually invested and interested in it, you'll solve the problem.
That's a good answer. Anything to add to that, Kat? Or
I do two things. So if I'm stuck, usually I have a pattern where I write in the morning and I draw in the afternoon. So when I usually stop when I get stuck. I try to do write a chapter a day or revise a chapter a day when I'm working on a book. And then I love to, if I'm stuck in the morning or I'm stuck in the afternoon when I finish something, I'll either draw and let my subconscious kind of work, because my active mind's working on something else, like a project for the video game or for like a map for a client. And then it'll just come to me as I'm thinking, and I'll listen to audiobooks when I'm doing that. Sometimes when I'm hearing somebody else's work, that helps. I try to read a little every morning and then that flows into my writing, because I have to read someone else's work that makes me hear my voice. Like I go to people's work that, oh, I suddenly can hear myself, and then I can't stop the words. I want to write, why I want to write books, and it just goes, oh, I want to do that too, and I get excited and I do it. So I think it's about kind of, at least for me, it's about tricking yourself into, oh, this is fun again. Like I'm having fun. I want to do this. I want to be here. And I'm sort of writing letters back to my favorite authors or my favorite content creators. And it could be a comic that day or a book the next, but I have to get inspiration to refill the well.
Cool.
Right. Let's take a few more. Here's one. I just want to say thank you, Jen. Jen said some nice words about my books, and she said she's going to chase down Jennifer Strange, Blood for the Sun, Lightning Wears a Red Cape, and All the Dead Men. She's going to spend a lot of money here. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
And then there's one person who wants to buy the T-shirt that you designed, Eric.
Oh.
Hey.
How do we buy the T-shirt you designed? Sounds awesome.
Is it on Threadless?
It's redrobot.threadless.com.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
You can actually buy it. Oh.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna look that up later too. What's it? What is it again? Sorry.
redrobot.threadless.com.
Okay. Wow. Cool. Let's see. Sorry, I already missed where I want to be. Well, I guess we sort of have to maybe talk about this a little bit. I mean, this doesn't have to be a big, long answer, but he wrote, I know that a lot of folks, myself included, are feeling a bit of brain drain fatigue with the world on fire and all. How is your creative process right now? Are you feeling productive, or are you sitting on the couch pounding cookies and watching Netflix? I know my first 2 weeks of March, I was on the couch. I don't think I wasn't pounding cookies. I was like squirreling away food. Like I was like, oh, we're not gonna have enough food. This was like when we first closed down. I was totally freaking out. And I was watching like Mythbusters and Animal Planet and shows about people taking care of animals at zoos just so I could shut my brain off. So it's been like sort of, it's come and gone. Like there are some days where like, oh, I've been able to get some stuff done, and others where I haven't. So I think the biggest thing is, I've heard so many writers talk about this. You know, don't beat yourself up. There's already enough anxiety with just existing right now that, you know, just know everyone's struggling with it. So, you know, if it brings you joy, as Kat talked about, you know, then great. You know, if you didn't get anything done today, that's fine. You'll get something done tomorrow. I don't know about you guys.
I think Kat was sort of agreeing that it is a weird time, and there's a lot of existential dread that I think puts a lag, a drain, a drag on sort of free, joyful creation. For me, I don't read a lot of, but I do read socio-political history books and things like that, because I want to understand. We're not educated very well here in America, and I want to understand where this place came from and why things are the way they are. And a lot of the things that are breaking now, with all of the protests that have been inspired by that last bit of police brutality, all of that is like a psychic dam breaking, and every day is story after story after story, and it takes a lot of mental effort for me to not engage with all of that stuff too much, because it's just a very deep rabbit hole of history and even current information that people are in general aren't as aware of as maybe they should be to be good citizens. Plus, all of this stuff has been affecting my family our entire lives since we've been here, and it affects my family now. It affects extended family and friends, and just the mental gymnastics it takes to build a wall and get back to creating something that doesn't have anything to do with that is difficult. And try not to drink too much.
I completely agree with Eric. It's not that you don't feel the dread when you step and try to create, because I'm feeling it from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed, like about everything. I'm feeling all of it all at once. The virus has been a particular threat to me only because I'm high threat. If you don't know me, you don't know I'm living with heart failure. I'm technically in the stroke range. So if I get it, I don't know what would happen. And I've been to the ICU. I was there for 2 weeks where they were trying to get my heart up from 10%. And so when I heard all the symptoms, and they were very scarily close to what I'd been through, I was like reliving it. The first 2 weeks that we were all told to go home here in Massachusetts, I was like reliving the trauma. But I had a book due. I had a book due at the same time. And I kind of felt like, on a more positive note, that the work did save my sanity, because I totally would have spiraled had I not had the deadline, like, okay, Jennifer Strange is coming out. I got to get it ready. I got to go through revisions, get on Neck Alley, do all the loops. And that really helped to create something and feel like you're speaking up and putting words to paper. And it's not just going to avoid, because right now it can kind of feel that way. When you're speaking up, it feels like there's so much going on. I think that, and I would feel the dread the entire time I was working, but I just kind of used being able to create something as a life raft. It helped a lot.
You did a lot. You did a lot for that book.
Yeah,
I did. And so what Eric's referring to is he designed my book. He designed Jennifer Strange. He was the book layout designer. And he knows I went through it 4 times between, like, 4 revisions between March and June. Like, it just went to press 4th of July weekend. That's when it went to print. And I know because I was talking to Eric on the 4th of July. He's
wow.
amazing. Buy all of his books. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Kat.
All right, two questions, and then we'll let everybody go enjoy the Miami evening. Oh, shoot, where'd it go? Oh, how often do horror books and movies actually scare you?
Cool.
I like this question. I'm excited about this question.
No, jump in then. Go first.
Okay. I know, because I was just talking. So horror books don't really scare me. Like, it's so funny every time I hear, oh, Paul Tremblay scared me. I'm like, I read his books, he didn't scare me. He didn't scare me. I read Stephen King, he doesn't scare me. But watch horror movies. Like, I think I've been to a movie with you, Eric. But I think you've seen me where I'm sitting with my hands like this over my eyes and my knees are up in my chest, and like acting makes fun of me the whole time. I'm like, I'm so scared the whole time. So for whatever reason, when it's written, I'm not scared of it. But when it's a movie, I'm terrified. So I'm a great person to go see a horror movie with, because even though I write this stuff, my reactions are huge. Like, ah. So yeah, that's my answer. What about you two?
I think the modern approach to these things, I think people have been building and building and building on both experience and skill, both in making movies and writing books, and even certain television shows. Like, they're really pushing a lot of boundaries in some stuff. And everybody has different triggers. But for me, a book will be scary if I'm reading. There's this quiet, really supernaturally quiet period between like 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. And if for some ridiculous reason I'm reading something scary at that point, it does start to get to me. Other than that, movies and TV, I think there might be a jump scare, but it's confined to that screen. Like, it's over there, but a book's like way in your imagination.
Right. I'd say similar to Eric. I mean, first, I'm a card-carrying scaredy cat. Like, everything scares me. I'm home all by myself, which I haven't had to do in a long time. But like at night, if I'm home by myself, yeah, like I creep myself out. Movies are, I think, more visceral, more of the moment. Like, so as an adult, I mean, as a kid, everything gave me nightmares. But as an adult, movies I'm more scared in the moment, but that feeling, it kind of sticks with the moment of the movie for me. Whereas books, I might not be scared in the moment, but those are the things that tend to linger. Those are things that if I wake up in those hours that Eric described, those are the things that are sort of running through my head, and I'm totally freaked out.
Too quiet, man. Too quiet.
Yeah, the books linger. They linger. All right, last one. This is a good one to end with. What horror trends would you like to see become popular in the future? I don't know what trends we have, for one thing, but well, I would say I enjoy that. I think part of sort of, I don't know, people always refer to a horror renaissance right now. Sure, I think horror is certainly more popular. It's been, maybe compared to the 90s or even early 2000s, but it's still like two different sort of tracks in books, right? But I think where they overlap, I enjoy seeing more mixture of genres. I'm enjoying seeing obviously more own voices and diverse works being represented. And obviously I want to see all of that increased. As far as, I don't know, like when he says tropes, it always makes me feel, think of like, oh, is it a zombie? Is it a werewolf? I don't know. I just think it's more, to me, like I always like to think of horror as a big genre. That I don't like thinking of horror as a narrow thing. Like horror isn't like it's the scare. Horror, moves you emotionally and moves you, to feel dread, which I think is, because the scare is so subjective, right? What scares you might not scare me. Same with the laugh, right? I think horror is more like just the uneasy feeling. And I think more people are sort of hewing to that idea of horror being sort of a little bit more and more larger and maybe not as strict a boundary, I guess. And I just took a lot, sorry.
I'd say the trend I'd like to see is mining more different people's experiences for horror. I mean, that's kind of specifically what Jordan Peele has done twice now. He's mining a very particular type of experience and created two horror movies from it. And it's through the lens that we're all familiar with. Like, this is all the type of stuff that we're familiar with, but it's just that different perspective that makes it feel fresh, more fresh and new. And there's just so many people out there afraid of so many different things, with cultural backgrounds that have so many scary things in them, like anything from monsters to just lived experiences. I think I'd like to see more of that in things, although it'd be pretty scary and awful.
I completely agree with both of you. I would love more diverse voices in horror. And specifically, I'd love to see more people make up their own urban legends. I'm really excited about Candyman this year. I loved It Follows, where that was really effectively done with its own rules. I think there's so much space to play there where you do your own thing. I would love more, just more like where you make up your own rules and it's really believable and consistent within itself and tells stories about an area and a people with truth, along the way. That's my favorite. All
right. Great. Well, I mean, I think, I just lost my screen. That's a good way to end.
We can still see you.
Thanks for coming. Yeah. Oh.
So we can definitely still see you. And oh my God, this was a fascinating conversation. Thank you all so much. Did anybody see Midsommar?
Yes.
Not yet.
Funny
I
and
love
horrible, right? At the same time. But what a great ending.
It was a great ending. Don't spoil it.
I actually have a ghost in my house for sure that actually helps me run these broadcasts. So, every time I'm about to go on, I'm like, please don't let it fall apart. Just keep it going. And he actually helps. And I'm totally serious about that. But anyway, This is fascinating. I think we could go on and on all night talking about this. I hope that you'll join us again sometime, but I thank you so much for being with us this evening. It was a pleasure to meet all of you, to hear what you have to say, to celebrate your work, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so
Thanks for
much.
having us.
We'll see you IRL soon. Okay?
Let's
Until
hope so.
stay safe and be well and keep writing.
Good night, y'all.
Night.
Good night.